all your germs over.
So I'm really glad that so many of you could be here today for the memorial session for Arthur Abramson. It's nice to see a lot of people who have been associated with the labs for a long time. Also honored to have Arthur's son with us today, David. We have a number of speakers from various aspects of Arthur's career. We are still waiting on one speaker. We hope he'll be here momentarily. Just a reminder that after we finish, there will be lunch in the library, so we hope you'll join us for that. So Ken will start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And I want to thank Laura and Doug for organizing this, putting it together, and I want to welcome everybody. Arthur's son, our President Emeritus, and who we're hoping to see a lot more of this year, and all of you today. I'm not going to make too many remarks because we have lots of people to talk about Arthur as a friend, as a colleague, and as a board member, because Sheila Bloomstein will be, I think, has some remarks on his amazing work. We all remember him on the board as well. I just wanted to, I've been thinking a lot about Arthur in this week and about what I would say, what I feel. And so the first thing I want to say is that my best memory among many about interacting with Arthur were his questions to speakers. Because they always came out of like left field, really, like left on left on left. And then somehow they often, not always, but often got right to the heart of the matter. And it was just so much fun to see him pull the speaker out of their comfort zone and make them think. It was really fun. And then I want to share something that really struck me today. We all interact with people, and there's a level at which we talk and we think and we communicate and we agree or disagree. But there's a level at which you react emotionally or unconsciously. And I was thinking about my reaction to Arthur. Every time I saw him, with almost no exceptions, I felt happy. I mean, I felt buoyant in myself. I'd see him, this bundle of energy. And then we talk science, and I feel better about my science. Or we talk travel. He and I both love to talk about it. And I feel better about my travel. But he was one of those people, for me, that every time I saw him, my mood improved. At a very deep sort of, and I think it was because he genuinely loved to talk and to be with people and to share the scientific enterprise. And whatever it was, I thought of all these 20-something, 30 years, whatever it is, and how I would feel buoyant just talking to him. And I think that is a very special memory for me. I miss him. Now that I walk back past his desk, I miss that bundle of energy and the reaction that he evoked in me. So that's really what I want to share. And I want to welcome all the speakers and thank everybody today. As Laura said, we want to make this a celebration of his work, his life, and his influence on this institution that we all love. So thank you, everybody, and welcome.
So our first speaker will be Frederica Valverde.
Does anybody know that's my first name for you? I didn't know it until I was 43 years old.
You may stand
I
wherever
just
you
want to
like.
say where I'm not going to be with the projector.
Yes.
Thank you for that description of the bundle of energy, because that is the perfect description. I'm going to talk about how I met Arthur. It was September 2nd, 1969. Now, the reason I can remember that, it was the day I started at Haskins Laboratories. And there are only a few folks in the room, and since Larry's not here yet, I know Donald and I remember that the 5th floor, where all of the EMG research was done, was this big loft with pillars holding up the roof. And I arrived, and Catherine Harris, I was to be her research assistant. It was my first day. We were going to fill out paperwork. And she started to take me and introduce me to people whose desks were scattered about this loft. And then she was paged to the telephone. In those days, the telephones hung on pillars. There were 2 on the 5th floor. And so there I was, in the middle of a space much bigger than this, with a few pillars, and she runs off to take the call. Have you ever felt like the floor just opened and let you sink in? And suddenly, this bundle of energy appeared next to me and said, "You're Kathy's new student, aren't you?" Yes, I am. "What's your name?" "Freddie." "My name's Arthur," and we shake hands. And then he starts to ask me what I'm interested in studying. I mean, I just started in the doctoral program, I'm not really sure. And then all of a sudden he said, and some of you will remember this comment, "They don't just pay me to stand around and chit chat, I've got to go." And there was Kathy standing next to me. So there was Arthur. The communication, the compassion. He must have, his desk was on the 3rd floor, he must have come up for something and saw Kathy walk away and me stand there. And he took care of me in that period of time. We eventually got down to the 3rd floor where I met Dr. Cooper and Dr. Lieberman, and we walk into a room and she said, "And Freddie, this is," and he said, "Oh, Freddie and I have already met." That was Arthur. By the end of the week, I was erasing 1-second portions of his voice from the tape because they weren't supposed to be included. I was only supposed to, and somebody had made an error. But Arthur, always, this feeling of joy upon seeing him, just there he is, and it was always just the most wonderful, wonderful experience. Welcome.
Thank you.
You are not late. Not yet.
No, you're on time.
Okay, could you open that up for me?
Sorry.
Should I turn to
One of those lights.
Yeah, the top one, I believe so.
That one?
Ken, did you turn down the heat or?
Oh, sure. I just turned it down. Was it 7:04? I turned it to small.
The Eagles and the some lights are turned. Actually, I am, but we could switch. Okay. Are you ready to jump in? Okay. I will continue to find my machine.
Hey, Doug? Yep. If you cover that bulb, it will not burn.
Late, but I-95 was not cooperating.
You can, just turn it on, it starts back up pretty quick.
Let me, before you start, just introduce Larry Rayfield, who was one of Arthur's first students, maybe the first.
The first student,
Arthur.
wow, close to it. I don't know. They were ready before me,
And Professor Emeritus of Adelphi University. So welcome.
and the City University. And forget it, too many emeriti. When Laura first asked me to talk, she said she wanted some personal recollections of Arthur. And I told her that, it was very hard to do that without making the talk sound like it's about me. I mean, that's probably true for anybody who has personal recollections, so I'm not going to worry about it. Just ignore what I say about me and concentrate on Arthur, who was probably primarily responsible for my career. And I'd like to emphasize a couple of things. Number one, his ability to teach, which was absolutely astounding as far as I was concerned. And secondly, his sense of humor, which I thought was, well, you're here. You'll have to cast your minds back to 1963. Some of you can't do that. Arthur was on the faculty at Queens College when I was doing my master's degree. And lo and behold, in in the registration booklet, there was a course called Acoustic Phonetics, which had never been offered before in Queens College. And I figured, why not? I'll sign up for it. Now, you have to imagine the classroom, because that's important in this story. It was less wide than this and at least twice as long. Of course, as the years go by, it gets longer. And there were about 4 seats across, a door at this end, a lectern at the other end, and a door behind that, and a ledge running across one side of the room on which was the equipment, which consisted of a reel-to-reel tape recorder and a sound spectrometer. So I came in, opened the door, there's nobody in the room. So I figured I'm a little early, and I sit down in the last row, of course, and a few minutes later, Arthur comes in the other door and stands behind the lectern. Now, he knew that I was the only person registered for this course. He had the roster. And he solemnly put down his papers on the lectern, and I didn't bring my telescope because I wasn't sure. And besides, the lectern was tall and Arthur wasn't. And he said, I will now call the roll. And he called my name. Being a well-trained student, I said, present. And he said, good, let's get to work. And we then went over to the ledge with the equipment, and we did go to work. But the interesting part about that was every other week in that semester, I would come in that door, sit in this seat in the last row. He would come in the other door and say, I will now call the roll. But we did some good work that semester. Little did I know that he and Lee were in the throes of doing the final version of the Voice on Set Time article, 1965 word, and he gave me a tape with an unknown language. Arthur's technique of teaching was to keep anything that you didn't have to know from you until the time came to tape. So he gave me a tape with a language that I didn't know. It turned out to be Farsi, okay? Although they call it Persian in the article. And he trained me to measure voice onset time. He also didn't tell me that it was voice onset time. They didn't use the term, he wasn't using it anyway. And so I sat down, I measured the tape, and lo and behold, and this is the way Arthur worked, my first publication was a footnote in that article. And, something of which I'm still rather proud. You can check it out. It's on page 404. And that was the start. That was the beginning. We did a field trip that semester to Haskins Laboratories on 43rd Street. Freddie, 3rd and 5th floors, do I remember correctly? Yeah.
Yes. The 4th floor was
underwater people.
Was the underwater people.
That's right. And they're still there. That was a revelation, if you might understand. It was more than just a tape recorder and a spectrometer to play with, and he just set me loose, talk about a pig and whatever, and kind of smiled as he watched me play with these toys and change the intonation on a sentence and do other things. I'm becoming an archaeologist of past Haskins venues. Freddie knows about this too. It was a while before we moved up to Haven, to 270 Crown. And in the interim, Arthur invited me to a meeting of the Linguistic Circle of New York, which was the organization that published work. And what he didn't tell me this time was that they were in the midst of a palace revolt. And you can imagine who the most revolting person was. He didn't tell me that they would be using invective of the sort that I thought only occurred in schoolyards. That was in the meeting. Arthur's comments, actually, during the meeting were elegantly phrased, and you had to sort of listen very carefully to hear the barbs, okay? They were concealed and nasty, and very funny. And in any event, that was an important part of my education. When we finally did move up to the labs, Arthur continued to educate me. One of the things he educated me about was where I could sleep. Well, when I first went to 43rd Street, I was astounded to find out people actually slept in the laboratory overnight so that they could get their work done, you know. And he was, if you stayed into the evening to work, one of his favorite phrases was, "Time to put on the old feedback." Yeah. We would go to the President Cafeteria, an elegant dining place, and experience, no question about it. Usually Lee was there, whoever else was around. I wasn't always, but when we came up to New Haven, I actually by that time had become attuned to the idea that I might stay overnight. Because I needed time on the old DDP 224, and you know, so. And I said, "Where do people sleep here?" And they said, "In the library." So I went up to the library, and I put my stuff down on one of the couches there, one of these moth-eaten, horrible. And Arthur came up with Lee, and he gave me a look which told me, "You are in the wrong place." This is where Lee and I live at night. So I became very familiar with sleeping in an IAC booth, which is very quiet. Stuffy, and you can sleep undisturbed, no question about it. Another example of what I assume Arthur assumed was his humor. He was on my dissertation committee as the outside reader. You got to cast your minds back to 1970, so we can include a few more people at this point. And he listened. He had about the dissertation, of course. And it came time for him to comment. And he said, "Well, you know, this is a very nice dissertation, very nice." He said, "A very, very nice, complete reference list," he said. He said, "However, you omitted the name of one author." And of course, it was him. It was Liska and nobody, you know. And it got corrected in one of the versions, but I've just discovered there's another version where his name is still missing. Sorry, author. The last story I'm going to tell you is one that I'm really not sure he didn't set up. And this was during the time he was at the CUNY Graduate School when I was doing my dissertation. And he would come in every week and he'd put his briefcase down right by the side of the desk. And shortly afterwards, he would want to write something on the blackboard. And it really was a blackboard with chalk. It was colored black, you know, days going by. And immediately he would spring to his feet. He never got up slowly and walked. He just jumped out of his seat and tripped over the briefcase. Just like the business of calling the roll, he did that every week. He did that every week until the last meeting of the class, when he did it, and it was a beaut. You know, he was the fingernails on the blackboard, grabbing the chalk rail and so forth and so on. He turned around angrily and said, "Who put that there?" Nobody told him to put that there. But I think he knew. I don't know. Maybe it was a way to, maybe he saw that we were, you know, these are all night schools. These are tales on a night school. Maybe he knew that we were tired and so forth, and he did something to wake us up every day. Whatever, as I said to Freddie on the phone the other day, I was a student of Arthur's, and I still am. And one of the lessons he taught me, by my own example, was you never lose a student. They're always there. Sometimes they want something, sometimes they just want to schmooze, you know, but they're never always there. And he always was the most generous, giving his time and his effort. So that's all I have to say.
I see absent.
Okay. So as this is coming up, I wanted to take a little bit of time here to say a little bit about some aspects of Arthur's early career, things that happened before I knew him. I discovered some of these in reading up on Arthur biography for preparing obituaries. So I figured if some of this was new to me, it might be new to some of you also. So I think when those of us who are linguists or phoneticians or other such strange people think about Arthur's career, we think, of course, of the 1964 Lister and Abramson paper, which introduced voice onset time. And we also think of Arthur as a person who spent a lot of his time studying Thai and other languages in Southeast Asia. But what was interesting to me, again, as I started reading, was to see how some of the threads of his early career kind of came together and made Arthur Arthur. And I do want to say that I was really so grateful to have access to excellent history materials of Haskins left. So Pat and I has an oral history, and then Carol and Don have a really nice interview with Arthur, and there's a lot of really interesting information in there. There was also an article that Arthur himself wrote about his time in Thailand that was supplied to us by one of his colleagues in Thailand. So I want to thank those people for providing that information. Oops. So Arthur was born in New Jersey, and in the interview with Don and Carol, he describes himself as being not much of a polyglot. Yet we go on to read that in his childhood, Arthur learned Yiddish through his mother's family. He studied some biblical Hebrew. I believe when he was in high school, he began to study French and Latin at the suggestion of his father. Somewhere in there, he began to study Judaic Aramaic. Subsequently at Columbia, he would go on to study Sanskrit and German. Of course, ultimately, he would go on to learn Thai. So with all of this background, you would think that Arthur was destined from the beginning to become a linguist. But actually, what happened was that Arthur first enrolled at Rutgers as a student of botany. And as far as I can tell, he might only have been there for a year or so before he went off to World War I, where he was stationed in Europe. World War II. Yes. And spoke of how it was useful being in Europe to be multilingual, was able to talk to the people he was running across in the villages. As part of his, I guess his main role when he was in the war was to be an X-ray technician. And that's going to come around in an early way for some of his early work. And that was some information that comes through in Pat and I's oral history. So after his 3 years in World War II, Arthur came back. He enrolled at Yeshiva University. He was studying French. He also studied Jewish history, took some courses in applied linguistics, and this is probably when Arthur began to think of himself as a student of linguistics per se. And I just want to mention that for those of you who don't know a lot about the field of linguistics, in those days there weren't a lot of linguistics departments. There was a department at Yale and Columbia and Penn, but this was sort of before the explosion of linguistics departments that came on later. So Arthur searched around. He got in touch with André Martinet, who was then the head of the program at Columbia University in linguistics. they apparently hit it off well. Arthur would go on to get a master's degree in linguistics from that program, and he would ultimately go on to get a doctorate, but he took a bit of a detour. So Arthur he described himself as having a bit of wanderlust, or wanderlust, if you like. He had looked around to find a way to travel. He received a Fulbright to teach English in Thailand. He and his wife went on to spend about 2.5, 3 years there, during which time, of course, Arthur learned Thai. He spent some time coordinating the Fulbright program for the English instructors, and he began to develop colleagues there. And as many of you know, Arthur would, for much of his career, continue to go to Thailand periodically. We have a clip from one of his colleagues at Chulalongkorn University talking about Arthur's contributions to that department. So after finishing his time in Thailand, Arthur came back to Columbia to finish up. And I just wanted to say a little bit about the people on the faculty in that department. Again, for those of you who don't know linguistics, this is a pretty impressive lineup. So Uriel Weinreich was the author of a famous book, Languages in Contact. He was an early dialectologist. Well, I shouldn't say early in this country, but he was a dialectologist and an early sociolinguist. He was also, he would go on to be the mentor of Bill Labov, who of course is at the University of Pennsylvania. Joe Greenberg was a very well-known student of typology of language universals. It may have been in comparison to Greenberg that Arthur called himself not much of a polyglot. There was John Lotz, who I didn't really know much about. I discovered an interesting thing that I'll tell you about in a second. John Lotz was in the field of semiotics. And then, happily, Frank Cooper was also serving as an adjunct in that department. And of course, at that time, Frank was at Haskins, and this was really Arthur's introduction to Haskins Laboratories. So what I discovered about John Lotz, I just happened to find this. It's amazing what you can find online. So I did a search on John Lotz, and I found a little article in the Columbia Spectator from 1953, in which we learned that John Lotz was very interested in using X-rays to study speech articulation. Did you know that, Freddie? No. Okay. So this is all beginning to come together, a lot of threads, again, in where Arthur would go with his career. So Arthur began to work at Haskins. He completed his dissertation project working with Frank Cooper, also John Lotz, Joe Greenberg. So his dissertation, The Vowels and Tones of Standard Thai, was a production and a perception experiment, very much setting the model of what Lee and Arthur would go on to do for much of the rest of their career. Arthur was also involved in an X-ray project, again, drawing nicely on his past experience. And my understanding about this X-ray project is that as challenging as it was to get the X-rays, there was also the part that it involved stretched speech. So the X-ray frame rate was rather slow, so they had to slow down the speech to match the articulation. And apparently it took a long time. And if Arthur said that something took a long time, I'm sure it took a really long time. And some of you may not have seen these early X-ray tapes, so I just want to spend a few seconds and play a little bit for you, so you will see some early Haskins people in here, including Arthur. I didn't embed this, so I have to pull it out separately.
Ka, ga, ak, ang. Ga, ak, ka, ga, ak, ang.
Jamie and me, yeah.
Ga,
I want to hop ahead to the liquids. So those of you who care about the consonant R, enjoy this. Oh, shoot. There we are. There we are.
La, ra, al,
This
ar.
is Gershman.
La, ra, al, ar. La, ra, al, ar. La, ra, al, ar. La,
And this is the
ra,
prettiest little
al,
retroflex R
ar.
you'll ever see.
La, ra,
Isn't it beautiful?
ar.
So, yes, a chunk of Arthur's early career.
Yi,
Um,
ya.
And there were a number of these, as you may know. So you can find these online still, happily. So along with the English, there was Hungarian, there was Russian, there was Arabic, there was Chinese. And these were actually prepared as teaching tools. I'm honestly not sure how much they were used as language teaching tools, but I still show some of this to my own students, so they have been certainly useful in that way. And just wanted to show you a 1963 JASA abstract talking about X-rays not only as a teaching tool, but as a research tool. So from these interesting beginnings, Arthur, of course, would go on to weave himself into many aspects of the academic and research fields. He was the founding chair of his own linguistics department at the University of Connecticut. We'll hear a bit about that. He had a 60-year publication history. He was very involved in professional organizations. He was, for example, involved in revising the International Phonetic Alphabet for the International Congress of Phonetic Sciences. He had a number of roles at the Linguistic Society of America, including president, including treasurer. He was an editor of Language and Speech for many years. He was also, for many years, the secretary of our board here at Haskins. So again, just a very productive and energetic scientific citizen. And so I now want to switch gears a little bit and get into the years when I knew Arthur. So I first met Arthur in 1989. I was then a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I went to my professor, Lee Lisker, and asked if I could get involved in some research somehow. And Lee was a very, very cautious man, and he sort of stroked his chin and thought for a second, and said, I will have to ask my colleague Arthur. And he went away to Haskins and came back the next week, and apparently Arthur said yes. So that summer I started getting on Amtrak and taking the lovely Amtrak ride from Philadelphia up to New Haven and spending my Thursdays with Lee and Arthur. And spending a lot of time listening to them banter and go back and forth at lunch and dinner and in the basement kitchen at midnight. And for those of you who didn't really know Lee, I just want to say that these two men made the most fascinating pair. Lee was a very kind man, but he was such a skeptic. He was skeptical about everything, and he sort of had perpetually raised eyebrows. Whereas Arthur just had the most sunny disposition, and they just played off of each other in the most interesting way. And you know, those of you who have been talking about Arthur as a bundle of energy, Lee was rather quiet, and Arthur would sort of energize things. But these two men, of course, had a very productive career together while still having their own projects. And so some of you have talked about how Arthur could get acerbic. And as I was reviewing this paper from Language, I found a nice quote that'll give you a sense of this. I'll read it for those of you in the back. So this language paper was a follow-up to the 1964 paper. The 1964 paper was showing how VOT could be used to measure distinctions in different languages. The language paper was really a more theoretical paper and more directly aimed at the feature system in Chomsky and Hallis, both 1968. So I'll just read this. American linguists have seemed happy to be excused from phonetics class, though they have not refrained from claiming to know a good deal about the articulatory basis for the difference by which utterances are distinguished. Touché. There's a few more in that article if you want to dig it up. It's great. It's great. And so, something else that a few of you have touched on is that Arthur also had a very distinctive way of speaking. And he had a number of what I'm calling Arthurisms. And in talking to a few of you, we all sort of have our own favorites. So Annie, what was yours about the frontier? Started calling you out. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
No, you mentioned this to me a couple weeks ago. Okay.
Sorry.
Something about you're out working on the frontier. We should call you about that.
Pushing back the
Something like that, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Pushing back the frontiers of science.
And Doug, did Arthur put on the phonetician hat or the phonologist hat? Which one was it? He put on a very specific kind of thinking cap. Do any of you remember what Arthur called his ophthalmologist?
He called his dentist his fang man.
Okay, the ophthalmologist was the eyeball. And he spoke of his ophthalmologist a lot. Arthur had glaucoma, and it was actually, I think, because of his bad eyesight that they assigned him to be an X-ray technician in the war. Does anyone remember what it means to, or how it's said to brush one's teeth? Scrub the choppers. Just a few more of these. For some reason, Arthur decided that he was going to call me Laura Love. And those of you who have known me for some time can probably imagine how I must have scowled at and he was completely undeterred. He just kept calling me what he wanted to call me until I kind of said, yeah, okay, it's Arthur. Nobody else but Arthur can call me that, but it's okay. But there were three, and a couple of these have come up. There were three that have particularly struck me in recent weeks. So we mentioned going to the trough, putting on the feed bag, and when Arthur spoke, I think particularly of his university career, he would speak of being in harness. That's when I was still in harness at my department. So if I put all of these together as a mental image, it suggests to me that Arthur sort of thought of himself as this sturdy little draft horse. And that's such a nice image for me because he was loyal, he was reliable, and he just kept plowing ahead. And that is such a useful lesson. So Arthur, of course, was a great many things to a great many people, and that's my list of what Arthur was. So we now have a video from Robert Vermez of Columbia. Okay.
Hi, I'm Robert Vermez. Thanks for including me in this celebration of the life of Arthur Abramson. Arthur, in the parlance of his colleague Philip Lieberman, was a trained linguist. That is, he was referred to in a paper by Lieberman in the 60s anonymously as a trained linguist whose judgments had contributed to Lieberman's measures. And we always teased Arthur about the fact that he was a trained linguist and the rest of us, we were either untrained linguists or, to put a better spin on it, we were trained observers of human behavior. Well, to celebrate Arthur, I should say first that I never took a course with him. During the era of my graduate study, when I saw him the most consistently, Arthur and I often went to dinner, and in this circumstance of informal tutelage, I felt that my lessons from him were as good as any that took place in the classroom. And especially, Arthur was a great tutor of remedial algebra, especially when he and his alter ego, Lee Lisker, would bring out a calculator in order to split the check. It's quite informative. Anyway, the reason that we went to dinner so often is that we both were working the graveyard shift at Haskins Labs on Crown Street. And in those days, the computer that we used was the Honeywell DDP-224. It was a multi-user machine because it had 2 terminals simultaneously, like 2 people doing work. And it only ever became available for long blocks of time during the evening. So what we would do is stay late, go to dinner, and then stay up all night or much of the night working on one or another project. And what was great is that there were some members of the senior staff like Kathy Harris and Michael Kennedy, Larry Rayfield, Mike Dorman, Ignatius Mattingly, and Al Liberman, who would also be staying up late to get their work done. And they would talk with the young people who, despite our present age, included Phil Rubin and Quentin Summerfield and Peter Bailey, and occasionally, if he was visiting, Peter Jusek. And Arthur would essentially, I wouldn't say he'd hold court, it's that he was approachable by us, and when we became restless or even frisky, he was there to fence with us. So after all those conversations, we actually learned a lot about the history of our field and the history of instrumental progress in the way we work. Even so, it was an era infused with grand theoretical gestures. And despite our emphasis on that, I have to say, I never really knew what Arthur believed philosophically. His capacity was enormous, and of course he knew everyone. He even knew almost Elvar, the famous dolphin. It was one of Arthur's stories from 43rd Street involved hosting visitors to the old Haskins laboratories who needed help from the linguists and engineers about a phenomenon they were investigating. And one of these phenomena involved the famous talking dolphin. And I remember how sweet Arthur was when he said he cued the tape and got ready to make the spectra and heard the dolphin say his name. That's my impression of Arthur. Anyway, as I say, he was always mildly suspicious of claims about conceptual progress, I would say. He believed that the best measurement was really the way to go. And he had the best measurement chops in the business, without exception. And his modesty as a scientist led him to value old ideas and carefully executed measures above all. So it made him a wonderful source of inspired criticism. A book had appeared. I'll tell you which book it was off camera. And this book purported to be a large-scale comparative study of the phonetics of, 101 languages. And when the reviews started to appear, I asked Arthur whether he had seen the book, had seen any of the reviews. And of course, a cosmopolitan reader like him, well, I don't mean he read Cosmopolitan magazine, but somebody who read everything and knew everything, knew everyone, of course he would have known about the book. And he said he had actually looked at it with some excitement and anticipation, but that he felt that for any language that he knew anything about, well, the book was just plain wrong. So it didn't make him trust the descriptions of the languages that he didn't already know about. And I can't even imagine what those languages might have been. So Arthur was always unfailingly gracious in public, but unstinting in his candor in our private discussions. And that made him a wonderful teacher, among other attributes. So I'm confident that Arthur had no idea about my work, And perhaps this is more significant than I would like. Because my work and the work of my close colleagues aimed at perceptual description, not phonetic description, there was no portrait of a natural language that was improved by our studies. When my friends and I would talk with him about our affinity for complexity or nonlinearity, he would always counter by reminding us that he was a proponent of Abramsonian dynamism. Then he would tell us his findings about acoustic phonetics. So he was always playful in that way, and not just about scientific work. He loved being teased about who was more famous, he or Lee Liskell. He also liked fielding questions about pious observance. That is, as you know, Arthur was quite learned about Scripture, especially Leviticus, which is full of all the thou shalts and thou shalt nots. And as you know, in order to show reverence for the deity, someone who is Jewish covers the head. So I asked Arthur, for instance, whether or not one could observe the commandment to cover the head by wearing a toupee, despite the fact that wearing a toupee would make it seem as if that individual were flouting the commandment. And these sorts of rabbinical conundrums took up a large part of our teasing of him, not just mine. He also enjoyed telling us stories about life on 43rd Street in the 50s and the 60s, and also about his personal life, his international travel, his frequent requests from third parties to carry a diplomatic pouch without looking to see what was inside of it. Of course, the way in which people in Thailand thought about the King and I, stories about Dr. Cooper, and of course tales about Arthur's own rebelliousness. I asked him once whether he had ever been arrested, and without dropping a beat, he shot back, well, yes. When I inquired about the charge, he said, yeah, the beef was threatening and menacing. So if he had aged into the role of our link to the elders of our group, he never grew elderly in his attitudes or his appetites. He was a wonderful presence, a gallant character in every way, who remained cheerful and decent about all of this to the end. I'm grateful for his generosity to me, and I miss him terribly. Of course, I still have the opportunity to read his work, and I'd like to give you a reading assignment from Arthur's production. It's a paper titled Perception of Stops by Speakers of English, Spanish, Hungarian, and Thai, a tape-cutting experiment which appeared in Language and Speech in 1960. And like so much of Arthur's significant work, it's a study of voicing. But this is actually a perceptual study. So thanks for including me, and God rest Arthur Abrams.
So pleased to welcome John Erickson, who was a co-author of Arthur's, has spent many years in Japan. And, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. This has been delightful, and some things I didn't remember until I came here, and I think I don't know why I didn't remember these things. And it's really very therapeutic to recall these things and see lots of faces that I remember, even though we've changed a lot. And so this is my perspective of Arthur. And first of all, I want to say this is May 3rd. And it was May 3rd, 1976 that I defended my thesis. So I think this is a really good day for me And that was, of course, a special time. And I have a very, very interesting memory of the thesis defense, which of course is always a bit nervous. And there was a question to me about the technical aspect of the EMG, and somebody said, she didn't answer the question. Arthur said, yes, she did. She said she didn't know. I was forever grateful. So, yeah, so anyway, I'm also one of the oldies, but I started UConn in 1968. I came from University of Michigan, did a master's in Japanese language and literature, and took a course in linguistics and thought, oh, this is what I want to do. And they just started a new department at UConn, and it looked exciting with Arthur and Ignatius and Phil, and Claire was there. And then the newbie, David Michaels, came. And yeah, it was a really good time. And Arthur helped me teach English as a second language to help earn a little bit more money, and he also let me babysit David and Joseph. So, you know, as everybody's been saying, Arthur mixed his personal with academics in a very, very nice way. And also, when I started at UConn, they were really involved with UConn and Haskins and the University of Tokyo and the logopedics and phoniatrics, RILP, and they were doing the EMG studies. And it worked out that I looked at the laryngeal muscles involved in producing the F0 contours of Thai tones. And that's what I did. And it was, as Larry has said and other people have said, it was an opening into a new field of phonetic articulatory research, and you caught the passion, and you still have it. It was a very good experience, and I'm still very involved with Masayuki Sawashima, Seiji Nini, Hiroshi Honda, Jim Hirose, and Hiroya Fujisaki, who wasn't actually involved in that, but involved in some other things. And Jim and Hiroya have especially fond memories of Haskins, and especially Arthur, how very friendly Arthur was to him, and they both want to say hello to you and to Arthur. I just saw them about a month ago in Japan, and they expressed their sympathy. So, and actually the study I did on Thai here at Haskins, although it was in Crown Street, was one of its kind. It's a classical study. Nobody else has done it. It just stands there too as a really good study. And it wasn't my fault that it turned out good. I was just there as part of the process. So my personal memories, more personal memories of Arthur is that while I was in Thailand in 1973, 1974, I had an NSF grant to study VOT and F0 and tonogenesis. I'm not sure how much work I did, but that's what I was there for. And my husband, Don, was in the Army, military then. And Arthur and Ruby were in Thailand also then, and they came to stay with us a couple nights at Lopburi. And you know, I was born in South Dakota. I wasn't used to this lively teasing that Arthur constantly did. I didn't know how to get back, you know. I was just like always off balance. But I knew he was being friendly and all. It was just like, and I remember just little things, like one thing, we started out for the day. It was a hot, sunny day, and I said, Arthur, do you have a hat for your head? And he looks at me and said, well, where else would I wear my hat? I'm like, oh, what a dummy I am. So, yeah. And then another memory of, we were at Aix-en-Provence in 1991 at the International Congress of Phonetics, and Arthur was always willing for adventures in collecting data and recording data. So outside in the sort of the reception outside, we recorded that's wonderful, with different prosodic conditions. And we later wrote a paper. And then he came to Japan around 2000, 1999. He was always going to and from Thailand. And he stopped in Japan, and we, again, recorded this time with Emma. That's wonderful, with different emotions, and that turned into a paper also. Yeah, Arthur was always very supportive of me. I always appreciated that, and he did open up a whole world for me that I'm very, very thankful for. And he was very personable. He always did his best to put people at ease. But sometimes I would be trying so hard to focus on solving a problem or expressing my idea, and then he'd come out of the blue with some teasing remark, and it would sort of drive me batty. Like, Arthur, I just want to try to concentrate. I don't know how to deal with this. But, yeah. So, and then the last time I met Arthur was a couple of years ago. He just remarried. He was so extremely happy and relaxed. And it was up by a lake we met. And we just spent the afternoon walking and talking and being old friends. I guess we've known each other for about 50 years now. And it was a very nice memory. So I just have something, I just have something short. I just really appreciate Arthur's inspiring in me a passion for doing phonetic research and continuing, and I never told him thank you, but thank you, Arthur. And we'll miss you. You're not at your desk anymore. So thanks.
So we now have, I will do my best on this name, a video from Pittayawat Pittayaporn from Chulalongkorn University.
My name is Joe Pittayaporn. I currently serve for abramson. My name is Joe Pittayaporn. I currently serve as the chair of the Department of Linguistics, Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. Today, I'm honored to be representing our faculty members, students, alumni, and also the Thai linguistics community in honoring our beloved Professor Arthur Abramson. Going through Arthur's seminal 1962 dissertation, the only place that is not strictly scientific was this brief passage in the preface. This research was designed to make a contribution to Thai linguistics through an acoustical and perceptual study of Thai vowels and tones. It is hoped, aside from such specialized interest as it may have, this study will also represent a modest contribution to the fast-growing field of acoustic phonetics. In contrast to these humble words, Arthur's contribution to acoustic phonetics is anything but modest. As for Thai linguistics, it is not at all an exaggeration to say that Ajahn Arthur, as his Thai colleagues and students call him, is the founding father of modern acoustics phonetics in Thai. Arthur's dissertation on Thai vowels and tones is the first modern acoustic study of Thai. In addition to laying the foundation for systematic phonetic study of the language, this groundbreaking work has also served as a precious historical record in the research on the development of Thai tones. Furthermore, a great part of his subsequent works was also devoted to a wide range of phonetic issues relating to Thai, including the production and perception of lexical tones, vowel quality and quantity, and phonation types. Not only did he produce a large body of knowledge on Thai phonetics himself, but also inspired countless phoneticians after him, Thai and non-Thai alike, to research numerous issues related to Thai sounds and sound system. In addition to Thai, Arthur also investigated other languages spoken in Thailand, including Khoi, Mon, Khmu, and Patani Malay. His work on these languages has contributed greatly to our understanding of aerial phenomena in mainland Southeast Asia, such as register contrast and tonal genesis. It was a privilege and a great honor for our department to have collaborated with him and to have received his generosity. Arthur was in close contact with 3 of our staff members, including Thirapan Leomtongkam, Galayating Sapat, and Sudapon Laksmi Yanami. But he also had fruitful interactions with other faculty members and many graduate students. During the 4 decades of our friendship, he shared with us his unsurpassable expertise and also helped mentoring many of our students. Although Arthur is no longer with us in person, his academic legacy will live on in the Thai linguistics community, and his kindness will linger in all our hearts. May our beloved Ajahn Arthur rest in eternal peace. Thank you very much.
David, yes, David Michaels, a colleague of Arthur's for many years at the University of Connecticut.
It's been a lot of fun hearing about Arthur from all of you here and the videos. I have a curious relationship to Arthur before I ever met him. And it was really curious. That is, Arthur was in Thailand in '55, I believe, and I was in Thailand in '61 to '63. Arthur was at Fulbright. I was with the first group of the Peace Corps to Thailand. Arthur did work in Patani. I spent a year in Yala, which was inland from Patani. And Arthur had been in Songkhla, and Songkhla was a place we would go to speak to the American consul. I was also at Chulalongkorn University in my second year in Thailand. At that time, I wasn't in linguistics, I was in literature. And I taught a course in English literature from Chaucer and Matthew Arnold, I remember. But I had never heard Arthur's name in any of this. After my time in Thailand, I went to Columbia University. And I was in English language and literature there. And I went over to linguistics on the recommendation of somebody and took a class from William LaBeouf. And Bill LaBeouf, who was very skeptical about Chomsky, was teaching Chomsky's syntactic structure. And it fascinated me. It gripped me. I went on in linguistics from that moment on. Finally, when I came to UConn in 1968, earlier for my interview, met Arthur for the first time. And we reminisced about our past, together, but not together. At any rate, Arthur hired me, and I'm thankful to Arthur for that, for my whole life, of course. I spent my whole career at UConn. Arthur was there all the time. He retired at about 25 years after he started there. He was very meticulous. In that first year, it was Arthur, Ignatius, and Phil Lieberman, and it was Haskins' department. But Arthur was very interested in bringing in a syntactician, Claire Asselin, Donna mentioned, and I was a syntactician actually at that time, but they brought me in to teach phonology, assured that I could learn it in technical teaching. And I did. I studied Chomsky and Halley day and night, and taught it for many years thereafter. I have to mention that Arthur was not only this pleasant, humorous guy, full of jokes, full of lightness and all of that, he was also extremely tough. And Arthur had been brought there as department head. And after 5 years, he wanted to have nothing more to do with it. But there was nobody he felt that he could hand it on to. When I went on my first sabbatical, Arthur said no more. He had been there as department head for 7 years, and he wasn't going to do it any longer. When I came back from sabbatical, I think it was Phil Lieberman who was acting head, and Ignatius Mattingly was acting head for a while, and the department was total chaos. Whereas in the years before that, when Arthur was there, everything was very systematic, and everything went, according to plan. And one of Arthur's plans was that this would be a collegial group, that we would work together, even though we were in different fields, we would respect each other's work. And that certainly took hold. And Arthur was very instrumental in setting that up, and I, of course, tried to continue that later on. At any rate, we got over that hump, and the department sent me over to the dean and asked if he would make me department head. The dean at the time, Julius Elias, said no, sent me back to the department. I asked him why, and he said he wanted Arthur back. I talked to Arthur and said, "Will you go back?" Arthur, as I say, was tough. He was finished with that part of his life. He would have nothing to do with it. And so he sent me back to the dean. And the dean told me against his better judgment, he would allow me to be department head. And I went on in that role for 16 years. But during those 16 years, when I was going on sabbatical, Arthur volunteered to be the acting head. And I can't tell you how thankful I was that it would be Arthur and not anybody else in the department at that time. Just because I was confident that he would keep this collegiality, he would keep our meetings, department meetings, as friendly kinds of things, department meetings of the whole, to deal with every aspect of the work at UConn. And he was that way. And every year when I came back from sabbatical, there was a surprise. And the surprise was that somehow Arthur had managed to make the department well-known, greater than it was, recognized by the National Research Council, so that the first time I came back, UConn was building its basketball program, and the men's basketball team was 6th in the nation. Well, UConn was 6th in the nation among state universities in linguistics, as announced by the National Research Council. I had nothing to do with it. It was all Arthur. The next time I went on sabbatical, again Arthur volunteered, and again I was extremely grateful to him for doing that. And in that case, when I came back, again there was a report from the National Research Council, and this time UConn linguistics was ranked as the first in its field at UConn, that is, in the field of graduate professional studies, that somehow we had turned out to be the top department in our field at the University of Connecticut. And again, I had nothing to do with that. Arthur somehow made that happen in the year that I was away. And I thought, no, I should go away again. We were afraid of what might happen. At any rate, Arthur was tough. That is, he was kind. He was my mentor as a department head. When I first arrived there, he took me, introduced me to the secretary that he had hired, and he, in front of her, told me that this is a state university, and we're dealing with taxpayer money, and we have to deal with it carefully. All right? This is another era, of course, when you think of what is is going on with taxpayer money in Washington right now. And but there is one connection. Arthur did build a soundproof room at UConn. But it wasn't for his personal secure communications. The department thrived under Arthur and continued to thrive under his mentorship for me and in the periods when I was allowed to go away and he could take over again. But it was Arthur's toughness, his refusal to take on that responsibility as the permanent head that was always there. The dean would have welcomed him back at any time. And that's because Arthur turned out to know everybody at the University of Connecticut. I would walk on the street with him to lunch, and we would pass people, and Arthur would say hello, introduce me, people I'd forget about immediately, but Arthur pretty much knew everybody. Just the last point about Arthur. Remember his toughness. When I was the department head, there was a merit system for increasing the salary that people were getting as increases that they got through the union as a regular thing, but there was also a discretionary pot of money called the Merit Fund. And the Merit Fund at the University of Connecticut in the College of Arts and Sciences was based on the total salaries in the department. And a percentage of that was made available as a pool of money to distribute among meritorious people. And it wasn't supposed to be given out in equal amounts or even in the percentage by their people's salaries. And the department, it turned out, was extremely meritorious, but very small. So that pot was not a very large pot. And the senior people, well, Phil Lieberman had left. The seniors were Arthur and Ignatius. I was sort of in between at that time as department head, and my merit was determined by the dean. And then we had these two very active, well-published, well-known in the field linguists, Howard Lasnik in syntax and Janet Dean Fodor in psycholinguistics. And there was no way to distribute merit in the department in a way among these people that I could be happy with. And as I was struggling at the end of the term in my office, puzzling how I was going to do that, calling the dean, asking for more money, and the dean telling me no. And I kept telling the dean, well, large departments like English have 60 faculty and faculty at other campuses, and so they have a huge pot of money, and they're not as meritorious as this small department with just 6 faculty. But the dean said, no, that's the way, we only can do it this way. And there I was, struggling and counting, using calculator, trying to figure out how to do this. And there was a knock on my door, which was open, and it was Arthur, and he came in, sat down at the desk with me, and said, you're struggling over the merit allocations. And I said, yes. And he said very briefly, he said, I have a summer salary at Haskins. He says, I'm compensated well at the university. Take my merit allotment and distribute it among these young faculty, Howard Lasnik and Janet Dean Fodor. And he did it every year that I was involved in the merit hour allocation as department head. So not only was he tough, funny, brilliant, tough-minded, but he was thoughtful, he was kind, he was generous in his treatment of junior faculty in theoretical linguistics at the University of Connecticut. And in this respect, I was very fortunate to be a colleague of his for all those years. And of course, I guess you do. Thank you.
So a few people have indicated that they might want to have a few words. Would you like to take some time right now?
Well, Arthur was my friend for a long time. I've known him for almost as long as anybody, maybe. I met him in 1965 when I joined Haskins Laboratories. And my earliest memories of Arthur, Freddie reminded me of, I had a very similar experience. It was Arthur who made me feel really at home and comfortable there. I had never studied linguistics or phonetics when I arrived at Haskins Laboratories. That's how little I knew about what was really going on there. I was a neuropsychologist. They took me in because I had been working on the brain and laterality and that sort of thing. But anyway, Arthur was one of my first teachers there, and certainly was the one that I felt most comfortable with and made me feel comfortable. I remember him saying to me when I expressed my feelings of inadequacy about Arthur said, well, he says, you're not expected to know everything here. That's why you have colleagues. And I don't know, I found that very comforting. So Arthur was always like that. And I don't want to say much more. People have brought out all of the things that, most of the things about his career. But maybe I would like to say that Arthur was interested in all facets of language, from the physics and physiology to the cultural and ethnological aspects. And Arthur was one of the driving forces behind the creation of another department at University of Connecticut, the Department of Judaic Studies. It was founded in 1979, and Arthur was one of the founders, and that's a thriving center for the study of Hebrew and the cultures of the Middle East. So I think he deserves credit for his breadth and his willingness to work for so many things. And I have one other memory that I want to mention that very recent, that on his 90th birthday, he told me that about a special event that was going on in Thailand in his honor, that the people at the university had arranged to have special prayers said for Arthur at the Buddhist monastery. And they sent, he knew about this and he let me know, and I was very happy about that.
So I just wanted to share an anecdote of one small time that Arthur failed, through no fault of his own, that puts into context all of his other successes. And it happened in this way. Many of the people here recall the pleasure of heading out to high on feedback with Arthur, especially about this time of day. And that was especially enjoyable when the destination was a Thai restaurant. And the reason for that is that you then got to watch Arthur negotiate in Thai with the wait staff about what the specials were, what was good that day, and what was happening back in the kitchen. And as a consequence, we all got better service, better food, and generally all worked out to everyone's advantage, except for this one time when Arthur attempted to speak Thai to the wait person, and the wait person just sort of stared at him. And Arthur repeated what he'd said, and changing the intonation slightly or whatever. Blank stare once again. And Arthur now on his medal, because I think he regarded this as a challenge. Once again, in Thai, tried to explain what it was that he wanted. And finally defeated, he said in English, "What part of Thailand are you from?" And the waiter replied, "Guadalajara."
Anyone else? Okay, we now have a short video from Sheila Bloomstein, who is faculty at Brown University and also the head of the Haskins Board of Directors. See if that's
I'm so sorry for not being physically present at this memorial event for Arthur Abramson. Arthur has been a critically important figure, not only at Haskins, but also internationally. Let me briefly share with you a few remarks about him. Believe it or not, I first met Arthur in December of 1963. Yes, 1963. I was a sophomore at the University of Rochester, and I was taking a course on acoustic phonetics. The professor, Dean Obrecht, had done some work at Haskins, and for the class, we read Haskins papers all semester. He also set up a tour of Haskins, which was then located in a loft in New York City during Christmas vacation. There I met Arthur for the first time, who gave a tour of the lab and demonstrated the state-of-the-art then, the pattern playback. Arthur was, as always, gracious and welcoming. From that time on, I was hooked on speech. Our paths continued to cross over the years. His seminal papers in collaboration with Lee Liskler on Voice-Ons at Time, first published in 1964, essentially started a cottage industry of studies in the research world, examining its properties in speech production and perception across languages, speaking rate, and perception and production in varied populations, including infants, adults, basics, dyslexics, among others. Why Voice Onset Time? Speech in both perception and production is the interface with language. As such, Voice Onset Time has served as a window into our understanding of mechanisms of both mind and brain. It is a critically important cue to voicing in stop consonants, and despite the fact that its phonetic implementation may differ across languages, as shown by Arthur and Lee, it serves as a phonetic phonological parameter in nearly all languages of the world, providing a means of examining how phonetics map to phonology, and as well providing a means of studying and understanding the psychological and neural bases of speech processing. Another plus for its prevalence in research over the years, VOT as a temporal cue is relatively easy to manipulate in creating speech perception experiments, whether using speech synthesis or natural speech editing. And it is a relatively easy measure to analyze its acoustic manifestations in speech production studies. Arthur's work has greatly influenced my own research. I did a count of the studies I've done over the years that have included VOT as a measure and parameter of interest, and came up with some 25 papers, more or less, whether looking at the effects of brain injury on its perception and production, the behavioral consequences and neural bases of categorical perception, or the resolution of phonetic competition and lexical access. And the beat goes on. Not only was Arthur a consummate researcher, he was also a loyal member of the Haskins community for well over 50 years. He was a valued member of the Haskins Board of Directors, of which I now serve as chair, where we have been able to connect regularly. He never missed a meeting, whether it was held at UConn or here at the labs, and he served multiple terms as secretary of the board. His presence on the board represented 3 distinct time periods, which provided us with continuity that is so critical for success: the intersection of the past, support of the present, and a vision for the future. I was fortunate enough to attend Arthur's 90th birthday party. He talked about his work and his career, The depth and insightfulness of his words was something for all of us to emulate. Arthur will be missed, but we are all fortunate that we've been graced by his friendship, his kindness, commitment, loyalty, intelligence, and humor.
So our last speaker is Doug Newman. We'll finish this off.
So I'm going to present just a little bit of my relationship to Arthur, because we've heard plenty of other stuff about the rest of what's gone on. I'll start off by saying that I am wearing a suit partly to tease Arthur, because Arthur, as you may know, was an incredibly casual dresser. He at one point claimed that they had shut down the faculty club at UConn because he refused to wear a suit there. I don't know if this is really true or not, but that's what he claimed. Many people have mentioned that it was that teasing was part of the routine with Arthur, and I would tease him too. My main point was that because the linguistics department at Columbia didn't exist anymore, he didn't really have a PhD, and he should go back to school. And, you know, we would tease him, but he was unflappable, so I'm not quite sure why, at least I kept doing it. Maybe other people could flap him, but I couldn't. Anyway, he also, despite his incredible research career, was never a PI of a grant. And so I kept telling him in the later years, you could get this boost that they give at NIH to new investigators. He never bit. Anyway, so I wanted to just talk about the beginning, middle, and end of my time with Arthur, and I won't go over all the years. I'm just going to do one thing from each one. So I met Arthur at the lab, of course, but the first time that I really kind of remember interacting with him in a very direct way was unfortunately at my very first talk at the Linguistic Society of America. Outlined in red there, it was not really the SS boundary, which doesn't probably exist, the boundary between something and itself, but this was in pre-Unicode days, so putting the hot check on the ESH was beyond the LSA at that point. I can't remember if Peter Ladefoged gave me his IPA lecture of switching from my Americanist tradition to using a hot check. In any event, I gave my talk, not terribly long slots, 15 minutes as you can see. And we get to the end, and I did not realize that I had stepped into one of Arthur's minefields. I had referred to the speaker in my study as a speaker of general American English, and this set Arthur off on a rant. And so he took up basically the entire question with this rant. And I had made the vast mistake of not practicing my talk at Haskins, so we hadn't gotten this out of the way ahead of time. But I never told him this, but I never quite forgave him for my very first experience at turning it into a rant about something that didn't really matter, either to me or anybody else. Yes, okay, I stopped using general American English. But, so the middle was good old A93. As many of you know, we number our grants with the letter A for research grants, and then we just kind of went sequentially. In the early days, they were in fact octal numbers, so there is no so A78 was the first non-octal grant that we had. Anyway, so A93 was in there. And as you may or may not be able to see, it was first funded in 1996, so I guess we're in our 22nd year. And in fact, this grant existed to study some really interesting stuff that is still going on. We are hopeful of having another 5 years on this grant. But my initial charge was, and I guess it must have come from Al, was to get Lee, Ignatius, and Arthur off of 840, which was our main grant. And the cap on the budget was such that we really needed to get these relatively expensive people off the grant. And so I took on that charge. And so there I was, this youngster at the time, and now Lee, Arthur, and Ignatius reported to me, which was quite a charge. Arthur, as usual, was quite amusing about it. He would always come to me and say that he was punching in, and then he'd back out again. And I was grateful for that. He did an incredible amount of work on the grant, and you know, he didn't have to. I mean, he retired from UConn, what year? I can't remember now, but it was somewhere in there. And he kept coming. He came every week. Lee came every week, although eventually he just kind of came to hang out. Anyway, but it was a terrific experience and far more useful to the grant than anything that I would have done by myself. So then, towards the end, I wanted to talk about VOT at 50. It was just amazing to me that even though Arthur was not a spring chicken when he published the original VOT paper, he was still around for the 50th anniversary. If you look carefully at the date, you see it should have been VOT at 52, but it took us a while to get this paper out, so it's still called the VOT at 50. And it was fun, not just because this was, you know, got us thinking about the theory behind VOT, which hasn't been explored as much as one might think, despite the thousands of articles that make use of VOT. There weren't that many that talked about it theoretically. So it was fun. We got to go through a bunch of stuff. We got to argue about the voiced aspirates in Hindi for hours on end. But it was also great because, I mean, Arthur would not have done this paper on his own, but he also was a huge contributor to the paper. So it wasn't like I just stuck his name on something that he hadn't done. And, you know, he was 90 at this point, so it was just truly amazing. Arthur was a really amazing, long-lived guy. So this is the picture that we use on our website for our staff meetings. It was years and years and years before I realized that this was not a picture from a staff meeting. Here's Ken over here telling us the truth. But he's not giving a staff talk. Here's Arthur at the trough, as usual. I'm down there at the trough too. I guess I was following suit. But Arthur was always there at every talk, and as has been mentioned already, he always has something cogent to say about every single talk. If Arthur didn't have something to say, you knew you might as well just get up and leave, because it must not have been very interesting. But this was part of this interdisciplinary and collegial atmosphere that he found in Haskins. And I just wanted to play a little snippet of Arthur from the oral history that Don and Carol put together.
Yes, you see, I would say that I was very soon struck by the atmosphere there. Mm-hmm. It was so enriching. I mean, it was a heady mixture of, you know, people and ideas and the freedom to do things, and very interdisciplinary, you see. So I sort of grew up in that kind of setting. I got quite used to it. It became normal for me to be in touch with people from psychology or something else, engineering, you know.
Yeah,
medicine.
that is one of the great things.
Sure.
People from.
So there were Arthur's dulcet tones, which we used in many perceptual studies. This is a picture from the 90th birthday celebration. And I just wanted to say that Arthur was a huge part of that collaborative environment. Certainly was for me. Like everybody else, I will miss him. Maybe I'll miss him more than some others, but he was just a force of nature. Truly one of the kindest and happiest people you could ever know. So Thank you all for coming to this event. It's really great to be able to remember Arthur, and we will, I think, continue to do so. Thanks. So please head to the library for lunch, and we can share a few more reminiscences.
Bradley did the same yesterday. He woke up at 3 and then 5 again.